To close out this week, we will be historicizing Tantra, looking at the Hindu-Buddhist world from the 6th through the 14th centuries. As a reminder, in ancient South Asia, we have the Gupta Empire from the mid to late 3rd century through the 6th century. At its zenith, from approximately the 4th through the 5th century, it covered much of the South Asian subcontinent. The ruling dynasty of the empire was founded by Sri Gupta, but other rulers included Chandragupta I, Samudragupta, Chandragupta II, alias Vikramaditya. The 5th century Sanskrit poet Kalidasa credits the Guptas with having conquered about 21 kingdoms, both in and outside the subcontinent, including kingdoms of Parashikas, Hunas, and Kambodjas, various groups located to the west and east of the Axos valleys, the Kinnaras, Kiratas, and others. That being said, another group further south, the Pallava dynasty, was a South Asian dynasty that existed from the 3rd century through the 9th century of the Common Era, ruling a portion of southern India, what is now southern India today. They gained prominence after the eclipse of the previous Satavahana dynasty in the south, whom the Pallavas had previously paid tribute to. The Pallavas became a major power during the reign of Mahendravarman. So we're talking 6th to 7th century here. And also Narasimhavarman from the 7th century. So 630 to 668 of the Common Era. They dominated Telugu and northern parts of the Tamil region for about 600 years. Throughout their reign, they were in constant conflict with both the Chalukyas of Badami, slightly to their north, and the Tamil kingdoms of Chola and Pandyas to the south. The Pallavas were finally defeated by the Chola ruler Aditya in the 9th century of the Common Era. But when we think about this period, you're seeing a period of social milieu and conflict, which is very much mapping onto the early period of the development of the Tantric age. Moving toward Southeast Asia, we have the surprising appearance of a number of different polities all right around the same time from the 4th through the 6th through the 7th centuries. Beginning towards South Asia, in what is today Myanmar, we will start with Sri Kshetra. This becomes one of the first Pyu kingdoms, and the Pyu city-states basically inhabit this Irrawaddy River from the 4th through the 6th century before they're subsumed into later migrations of the Mon culture, moving out of what is called Dvaravati. Dvaravati is a culture from the Chaupriya, predominantly Mon-speaking peoples that lasted from the 6th through the 11th century of the Common Era. Dvaravati tends to refer to a culture, an artistic style, and a disparate conglomeration of city-like principality social settlement structures of the Mon people. Archaeological research over the past couple decades or so has revealed a presence of also a proto-Dvaravati period, which spans that early 4th through 5th centuries, and perhaps earlier. Moving towards the Mekong, you find also Funan from the 4th centuries. The name Funan, you might notice, is a little bit different. It's actually a term that is taken from Chinese sources and is pulled from the records of Chinese cartographers and geographers and writers about the ancient Southeast Asian societies from around the 2nd through the 6th century. The name is found in Chinese historical texts describing a supposed kingdom of the most, although there are extensive descriptions which are largely based on the reports of 2 Chinese diplomats, the first being Kang Tai and then the second being Zhu Ying, which represented the Wu kingdom as they sojourned to Funan in the middle of the 3rd century. Then moving further up the coastward here, so Funan would be south here, and then further up the coastward here, you have records referring to Linyi, which is probably a proto-Champa kingdom from around the 2nd through the 7th century in what is today central Vietnam, which then becomes subsumed into the Champa civilization from the 6th through the 7th century. The ruins of a capital, which we now call Kandapura, are probably associated with Long To Hill, about 3 kilometers west of the city of Hue in the central region. Although there is some debate about this, and some other discussion has located Kandarpura further north. Early French scholarship believed that Linyi in Chinese records referred to Champa itself. However, there's been a reinterpretation of this. This suggests that the Chinese records took the same name and applied it to multiple places over the course of the 2nd through the 7th centuries, gradually coming to associate it with the Champa imperial city at Simapura and the Mi Sun sanctuary in the Tobon River Valley around the 7th century. Now, Dvaravati, Sri Kshetra, and Haripunjaya, another kingdom up here in what is today Myanmar, as well as the emergent Angkoran Empire, the empire that sort of grows out of the Mekong River basin after the collapse of Funan, as well as Champa, all have very similar construction styles for Shaivite and Vaishnava temples from the 6th, 7th, and 8th centuries moving onward. But you can see this most clearly at the Yashodhapura temple, which was the capital city of the Khmer Empire, a city which flourished and an empire which flourished approximately from the 9th through the 15th centuries, which houses the magnificent structures of Angkor Wat, one of Cambodia's most popular tourist destinations today. As you can see from this convenient drone footage, actually the construction of the area is very much like those yantra symbols that we talked about, and therefore we find clearly across Southeast Asia in temple construction tantric influence. So the yantra, as a reminder, literally means a sort of contraption or device, but it's a mystical diagram mainly from the tantric traditions of both Hinduism and Buddhism. The map that's pictured up there on the left, including Haripunjaya and then the Pagan kingdom, which arose out of the Pyo kingdoms in what is now Myanmar, is actually sort of falsely imposed borders for the sake of convenience. These borderlands would have been overlapping during the period in question in the 10th century. So next we're going to journey here towards Lanka Sukha, and we're going to look at an ancient Malay Hindu-Buddhist kingdom located in the Malay Peninsula. So we're looking at right around here in the Malay Peninsula. The name is Sanskrit in origin and thought to be a combination of the term Lanka, meaning resplendent land, and Sukha, meaning bliss. The earliest and most detailed description of the kingdom comes from the Chinese Liang dynasty, from 502 to 557 record of the Liang Shu, which refers to the kingdom of Langyashiu, which is thought to be Lanka Sukha. So we're talking about the 2nd century there. Then all the way on the other side of the archipelago, so here we've got the Malay Peninsula, then we're going to journey over to the other side of the archipelago and look at the island of Borneo, where you have Kutai, which is a historical region in eastern Kalimantan, and is evidenced by a 4th century inscription, much like early Hindu areas in other parts of Southeast Asia. This particular area has 7 stone pillars or yupa, sacrificial post, that have been found in the Kaman estuary of the Mahakam River. The plinths bear an inscription in a script that looks very much like a South Asian script, but it's a script that's common across South and Southeast Asia from the 4th through about the 6th century, telling of a gift to Brahmin priests. However, the name on the inscription, Kudunga, is not a name that looks like it's South Asian, so it's probably a Dayak name or a Proto-Dayak name. Then the last kingdom that we're going to be looking at here is Turuma Nagara. So Turuma Nagara is a kingdom of early Sundanese origin. From a 5th century inscription, we have evidence of a ruler, Purnavarman. Interestingly enough, in the Kudai inscription, we have Ashvarvarman as a title of a ruler who was the son of Kundunga. And in this case, we have Purnavarman as a title. You notice that this term Varman is also common from South Asia. So there's evidence of a sort of pan-South, Southeast Asian cultural connection here. One of the rulers of Turuma Nagara is Jayasingha Varman, who originated from Salankaya, which probably collapsed due to an invasion of Samudragupta from the Gupta Empire. So in one of these inscriptions, we have the title of a king or a ruler from India, in this case, who moved to this area, resettled in Western Java, and married a Sundanese princess daughter of a previous king, King Devavarman VIII of Salanka Nagara. So we have some evidence, even if it's somewhat mythological, you know, there's an outside ruler coming from India, so forth, that there is a certain amount of prominence asserted to individuals coming from abroad from India during this period of Southeast Asian history. Next, we're going to look at the island of Java and look at a couple of successor kingdoms to the Turuma Nagara kingdom. First, Kalinga, up in the northern section of Java, which then gets incorporated into Medang. The Kalinga kingdom was a 6th century kingdom that is Hindu-Buddhist on the north coast of central Java and Indonesia, but especially influenced by Hinduism. In 674, the kingdom was ruled by Queen Shima, who notoriously was very fierce against thievery, very fiercely against thievery. That was her position. She encouraged her people to be honest and to uphold the Dharma. But according to tradition, one day a foreign king placed a bag filled with gold on an intersection of roads in Kalinga to test the famed truthful and honest nature of the Kalinga people. Nobody dared to touch the bag that did not belong to them until about 3 years later, when finally Shima's son, the crown prince, accidentally touched the bag with his foot. He simply didn't notice it there. When the queen issued a death sentence to her own son, she was overruled by a minister that appealed to the queen to spare the prince's life. Since it was the prince's foot that touched the bag of gold, however, it was only the foot that could be punished through mutilation. The Tekumis inscription was estimated to originate from the Kalinga period, discovered at the western slope of Mount Merapi at Dusun Dakawu in Lembak village in Kecamatan Graba. So this is in central Java. It's written in again, that pan-South, Southeast Asian sort of script in Sanskrit, and tells about clear spring water that is so sacred that adored as an analog for the holy Ganges source in India. So here we have a local river that's being venerated sort of metaphorically as if it was the Ganges in northern India. The inscription also bears Hindu signs and imageries such as the Trisula, Kamandalu, a sort of water jar, a parashu, an axe, and also a shell, a chakra, and a padma, a red lotus, which are symbols of Hindu gods. Another inscription dated from around the same time is the Sotomotro inscription, which is described in Sotomotro village, also in central Java, but this time in Batang Regency. It's written in a Kawi script, however, which is a script that is local to the island of Java, and it's written in the Old Malay language dated from around the 7th century, telling the story of a ruler named Dapunta Selendra, the son of Santanu and Bajrawati, and husband of Sampula. So clearly we have local Javanese figures that are being referenced here. Indonesian historian Professor Bochari has suggested that Dapunta Selendra was the ancestor of the Selendras, the later rulers of the Mataram kingdom. Both inscriptions suggest that 7th century Java and the northern coast and central Java was a flourishing Hindu Shaiva sort of locale where Tantra probably had some type of influence, and Tantric schools had some type of influence as evidenced by the nature of temple construction. Some old Buddhist chandis can also be found in the vicinity as well in central Java. Historians have suggested that the Mataram kingdom or the Medang kingdom is a sort of link between this old kingdoms of Kalinga and Medang in central Java, but also later kingdoms of Java. So Medang, which is also known as Mataram, is a Hindu-Buddhist kingdom that flourished between the 8th and 11th centuries, established in central Java and later East Java by King Sanjaya and ruled by the Selendra dynasty. The Sanjaya dynasty, the first dynasty before the Selendra dynasty, was an ancient Javanese dynasty that ruled this kingdom throughout most of the first millennium, or for most of the second half of the first millennium. So, for example, that Prambanan complex, that Prambanan temple tower complex pictured in gray in the background of this slide, is associated as being one of the legacies of the Sanjaya dynasty. The most notable of temples constructed in Medang or Mataram, however, is Borobudur. So Borobudur, pictured on the lower right-hand side of the slide here, clearly you have samples from Borobudur, which are very much indicative of the adoption of yantra imagery in the construction of this Buddhist temple in this case. So here we have those tantric concepts influencing architecture and construction of a Buddhist temple in Southeast Asia. Now that later dynasty of the Mataram kingdom or the Medang kingdom is the Selendra dynasty or the Shailendra dynasty, which is derived from combining the Sanskrit words Shaila and Indra, meaning king of the mountain. And this is a reference to a very large mountain, which is also understood as a symbol for Mount Meru on the island of Java. From the 8th century onward, the Shailendra reigned with significant cultural sort of renaissance in the region, combining Hinduism and Buddhism into their own tantric understandings, using the Kawi alphabet and some of that sort of pan-South and Southeast Asian alphabet to write their script. But clearly under the Shailendra you have this flowering of Kawi alphabet and writing and also Old Malay language. So, for example, we also have some different understandings about the nature of the Shailendra dynasty that have suggested different types of origins for the Shailendra dynasty. Now, according to the hardline nationalist R.C. Majumdar, who is a modern historian of India, who is a hardline nationalist, The Sailendra dynasty that established itself in the Indonesian archipelago actually came from Kalinga in modern Odisha, one of those kingdoms that happens to have the same name. But this theory totally ignores that it's really common in Southeast Asia to have kingdoms that are named after South Asian kingdoms but have no relation to them. This opinion, nonetheless, was shared by one of Majumdar's colleagues, Kanta Shastri, and also the Dutch scholar J.L. Moons. So, nonetheless, there are competing theories on the origins of the Shailendras. So, for example, you have a theory that suggests that they're local instead. Shailendra in this theory was a native dynasty of Javanese origins, and the Sanjaya dynasty was actually an earlier branch of this dynasty, derived totally from local origins in this case. And then you also have a theory that the Shailendra dynasty was perhaps of Srivijaya origins. Now, Srivijaya was theoretically also a major maritime empire from basically the island of Sumatra. Srivijaya was an important center of the expansion of Buddhism in Southeast Asia from the 7th to 12th centuries of the Common Era. However, the empire was also Hindu in parts and a syncretic blend that's very much emphasized some tantric understandings of Hindu Buddhism in others. Pictured here as an 8th to 9th century Vishnu from the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which in fact is probably from a Hindu temple in Sumatra. According to the styles of Shiva and Agastya statues found in the Bumayo Temple I, and many Hindu statues dated from similar temples, most of these seem to indicate that there was a period of particularly Shaiva influence and then some Vaishnava influence around the 9th to 10th centuries. But then these get absorbed into Hindu Buddhist tantric understandings a little bit later, 10th to 11th centuries, and then by the 12th to 13th century, you have the predominant series of evidences suggesting that there's a shift from Hinduism to explicitly tantric Buddhism that occurs on the island of Sumatra. Now, one of those dynasties that you might recall from South Asia that I mentioned previously at the beginning of this presentation was the Pallava dynasty, an Indian dynasty that existed from about the 3rd to 9th century, 1275 to 897, ruling a portion of southern India. They gained prominence after the eclipse of the Satavahana dynasty, whom the Pallavas had previously paid tribute to. They were followers of Hinduism and paid homage to local gods and performed the Ashwamedha and other Vedic sacrifices. They were, however, tolerant of other religions. The Chinese monk Xuanzang, who visited Kanchipuram during the reign of Narasimhavarman I, reported there were 100 Buddhist monasteries and 80 temples in Kanchipuram, a very important religious center for the Pallavas at first, here nearby what is now close to Tamil Nadu in South Asia today. Now, note the end of that name, Narasimhavarman, Varman meaning protector or shield. That title Varman had also already become popular in Southeast Asia, as we previously have noted. Epigraphical and archaeological evidence suggests that Agama texts were in existence by the middle of the first millennium in the Pallava dynasty. So you have tantric texts that were part of this trans-regional space where the Pallavas were in the South Asian end. The Agamic traditions are those texts associated with Tantrism, especially the Shakta Agamas. Now, scholars note that some precedents of Hindu Agama texts appears to repudiate the early authority of the Vedas, while other passages assert that they have precepts or practices which reveal the true spirit of the Vedas. In other words, there are some that reject the Vedas and others that say we are the true Vedas, and still others that say actually We're just continuing the Vedas, so they have 3 different positions on those. The temple design and iconography, such as the Nataraja, again from UW Madison, pictured here on the right-hand side of the slide, are described in Agamic texts. They have rivalries. The Pallavas, however, have rivalries with the Cholas. The Pallavas captured Kanchi from the Cholas as recorded in the Vellore Palayam plates around the reign of the 5th king of the Pallava line, Kumara Vishnu I. Thereafter, Kanchi figures in inscriptions as perhaps a capital of the Pallavas, and the Cholas drove the Pallavas away from Kanchi in the mid-4th century in the reign of Vishugopa and the 10th king of the Pallava line. The Pallavas recaptured Kanchi in the 6th century, so they're contesting this religious space. Thereafter, the Pallavas hold on to Kanchi until the 9th century, until the reign of their last king, Vijaya Ripa Tungavarman. So, the Kanchipuram is very clearly an important part of the contestation between the Pallavas and the Cholas. But the Cholas are a Tamil empire from southern India, one of the longest ruling dynasties in world history. The earliest datable evidence puts them at the 3rd century before the Common Era, during the Ashoka reign of the Mauryan Empire. You remember Ashoka, probably. As one of the 3 crowned kings of Tamilakam, along with Chera and Pandya, the dynasty continued to govern up through the 13th century of the Common Era. Despite their very deep origins in the past, the period which is referred to as the Chola Empire is really the mid-9th century of the Common Era onward. So really during the peak of the Tantric age. From the 8th to 14th century, Tantric traditions rose to prominence and flourished throughout India and South Asia and Southeast Asia. By the 10th century, you have the main elements of Tantric practice reaching maturity, which are practiced in Shaiva and also Buddha traditions. So connect this all together. Why is Tantra so popular in these different regions, and why does it grow? Go ahead and make a quick post to round up the week, and let's keep the discussion going.